I often hear developing guitarists lodge this complaint when they talk about their soloing. They'll say, I know my scales, but when I take a solo, it just kind of sounds like I'm running up and down them. It doesn't sound like music. And that phrase I've heard articulated a bunch of different ways, but what it points to is this issue where, as guitarists, we learn boxes of scales on the neck, and we're told that these are the scales that our favorite guitar players use to take solos. And yet we just play up and down them in this sort of linear way, hoping that some sort of beautiful artwork emerges from it. It's kind of like using all of the different paint colors on a painter's palette and just throwing them all against the canvas and hoping that something beautiful emerges. And again, you may get lucky, but you likely won't. That's what our scales afford us. They are effectively all of the note choices we might employ, but we need something else to be paired with it to make music. And that's where phrasing enters the picture. Phrasing encompasses a lot, but specifically, as you'll see in this masterclass that follows, there's a bunch of ways in which we can grab those notes out of our scale shapes purposefully so that we are developing sentence-like structures. We're saying something in our licks. And what you'll see Jamey Arent, the great session player from Los Angeles, discuss is how we can use rhythm to purposefully guide our licks. Maybe that means starting on an upbeat, or maybe it means starting on a big beat of the bar. Maybe it means starting on a tension note, or maybe it means starting on a chord tone. Being mindful of those details is obviously super important. So Jamey's going to guide you through that with his PDF, which you'll find linked below in the description of this video, alongside a bunch of other really important concepts and exercises that professionals have been using forever to ensure that they're not just running scales, but instead that they're playing phrases in the same way that we speak in phrases. So we hope you enjoy this masterclass with the great Jamey Arent, and if you do, please consider subscribing to our channel.
So the thing about learning guitar, and this is something I say in pretty much every masterclass, no matter what the topic is, we have kind of a unique and unusual instrument in that there's a certain geometry to it just by the pure nature of the instrument, right? We have these horizontal lines that are made up by the strings. We have vertical lines that are made up by the frets, and we tend to learn things in boxes. And when we do that, we learn these sort of cliche guitar licks and lines that are built within the confines of these boxes. And of course, we work on fretboard fluency. I don't know if you're studying in Sonora, you're going along with the curriculum and learning how to link all your different scale shapes and scale boxes. But one of the ways that we can really start to break out of just letting your fingers run through these boxes is to think about the idea of phrasing, thinking about where we can put spaces in our lines, where we can develop motifs and ideas, and sort of make your solo sound more organic, more unique. And, we all we have the mythological guitar hero, right? We all want to be able to play fast and impress people. But a lot of times the people that we are impressing with playing fast, if it's sort of an extreme amount, are just other musicians and guitar players. And we want to really be able to communicate and use the guitar as a tool for self-expression when we improvise, and kind of think of our solos as musical stories. And so these couple things I'm going to show you today have kind of helped me work out, breaking out of just playing these sort of stock pentatonic licks or stock music licks, and thinking a little more organically in terms of our playing. I know organic is something we normally think about when we talk about produce, but thinking about a way of really just making your lines more kind of what you're hearing in your head. And I noticed at one point when I was, kind of singing along with recordings in the car, singing in the shower, or just kind of humming lines along, I was humming these really great sort of memorable bluesy lines, and then I'd go on the guitar and they wouldn't ever come out, like what I'm hearing in my head or what I could sing. I don't know if anybody has ever experienced that sort of thing where, you're listening to a recording and you go, no, 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 and you're like, wow, how come that stuff doesn't come to me when I play? And muscle memory is a major component on the guitar that's both an advantage and a disadvantage, right? It's an advantage because it allows us to be able to recall chords without having to think, right? When you first learn guitar, you know, for a G chord, I have a finger here and then a second finger. It takes you a minute, right, just to get to the chord. Now, I'm sure all of you, or most of you at least, could get to some of these open position chords. Don't even have to think twice about it, right? Your fingers have learned. Muscle memory is a very powerful thing on the guitar. And one of the greatest stories, I don't know how many people are familiar with the story of Pat Martino and what happened to Pat Martino. If you're not, I'll give you a short story. It's an incredible story. He, for those of you who don't know, legendary jazz guitar player, passed away a couple of years ago, but really came into prominence in the late 60s, sort of like just a shredding bebop guitar player. You know, famous albums, you know, playing with the best of the best. And around 1980, he had, I believe it was a brain aneurysm and had to have serious brain surgery, complete amnesia, forgot everything, forgot who he was, forgot that he played guitar, the whole thing. And didn't even know he was a world famous guitar player, that he could play guitar when he came out of that operation. And he recovered at his father's house or his parents' house, and his father would play Pat his own records, and Pat relearned to play by listening to himself. And part of the reason that his road to recovery, he ended up gaining it all back and once again returned to the top of his game. Famous player, toured all over the world. I saw him a couple times. He gave master classes that I was able to attend. Was because even though his brain forgot a lot of that portion of the guitar, his fingers, a lot of the chops, right? The memorizing, the dexterity was still there. So that's one way that muscle memory can be an advantage. And there's a great documentary about that where they talk to neuroscience. It's an incredible story. But going back to the route of our masterclass here, muscle memory can be sort of a detriment to our playing when we learn these sort of stock, you know, guitar licks that are great and we all play them and we all love them. But sometimes we learn so much of these licks that we just kind of spit them out and we just kind of go through our little boxes. And all of a sudden we're just regurgitating these kind of lines and not really tapping into that greater thing that we're talking about. So this is what we're going to kind of start to break up. And for me, you know, do I kind of slip into those things, and do I slip into my kind of Chuck Berry or Stevie Ray or Hendrix moment where I play these kind of pentatonic 100% all the time? But a lot of times I'm going to try to focus on making melodies with the notes that I have and thinking less about these sort of guitar licks that I've learned and kind of breaking out into more of a melodic thing. Sorry, I sounded a little out of tune there. So let me just do a little tuning here. But the way I like to think about it is that when we learn these scales, right, and you're all learning scales, major scales, pentatonic scales, a scale is just an alphabet, right? And by the way, I wrote this course or this little portion under the framework of playing the blues. Obviously, this relates to any sort of musical style where you're improvising, whether it's jazz or funk or rock or country or bluegrass, any style of music where you're improvising guitar solo, this applies. I'm just thinking of the framework of the blues because pretty much in all of those styles where, you know, there's a blues form. It's typically, right, when you get together with somebody and say, hey, let's jam, what do you want to play? The song we all know or the thing we all know to play over is a blues. So I kind of thought of this over the blues form, but we're also going to talk about playing out over just a one chord band. But a scale is just an alphabet, right? And we're just going to take A minor pentatonic, something we all know. Right, when I play A minor pentatonic, that's just an alphabet. A, C, D, E, G. Those are my notes. And we don't go around communicating to each other when we speak English, when we talk, reciting the alphabet. I don't go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N. Right? We know these letters, but knowing letters is just the first step to communicating. The same way when we take a guitar solo, we don't go, right? Because that's just, you know, that's just reciting the alphabet. So the next step when we speak a language is to rearrange the letters to make words and then combine the words in order to make ideas, right? Sentences, phrases. So, okay, so let's say we got words, but I'm not going to go ahead and talk to you and everything like those. Sounds like, you know, the small print at the end of a commercial. Because when we speak a language, we also need punctuation. We can't just rely on using words and letters. We have to use sentences, you know, and we have to use, to build our sentences, we need commas, we need periods, sometimes exclamation marks. So we need all this kind of punctuation in order to make our ideas be able to be understood by the person that we're speaking to when we speak, or playing for when we play music. And the pauses in our speech are the same way we leave rests in music. Oftentimes, when you leave a pause after something you say, it's because you want to give the person that you're speaking to a chance to digest what you've said and listen and kind of take it all in. Because if we're speaking so fast, there's no way you can understand what somebody's saying, because you're going to kind of fly by that idea. So the person can't grasp it. So it's the same thing when we play music. We want to add spaces so the listener can take in what you've played and kind of, okay, cool. Whether that's the listener being the audience and saying, oh, okay, that was a cool idea. That was a cool lick. Or maybe it's somebody that you're playing with, like somebody in the band, right? If I play some kind of lick and leave a little space, that gives the keyboard player a chance to play a fill, or the drummer a chance to play a little fill and respond. And then that opens things up for a dialogue, right? For a conversation. So adding the rest just gives that kind of thing. And if you think about a great speaker, right? If you've ever heard a great speech that really moves you, maybe it's a poet or a politician or whatever, you'll notice that great speakers often will leave those pauses for you to have a chance to reflect. So we can think of a guitar solo in the same way, like a story, right? When you tell a story, or read a novel, or go and see a movie, there's sort of this climb, right? When we go see like a James Bond movie, there's the characters are introduced, we meet the villain, we learn the evil plan. Then there's the big scene towards the end where they go to the villain's lair and everything's blowing up, and that's before the end. And so when we play a guitar solo, we have to build to that moment of tension. And so we all want to come up here and play all that stuff. But once again, that is not going to have as much meaning to the listener if you just start there, right? We want to build up to that moment so that moment really hits when it's supposed to hit. Otherwise, you're going to numb the listener with too many notes. And when you play too many notes without the proper phrasing or without all the right spaces, first of all, you're going to hit that ceiling much earlier. You're not going to have the longevity that you're able to have because you've kind of said it all and there's not much else to say. You're going to run out of ideas. So it's also that, but it's also you're going to be playing too much to digest. And it's like when you go and see that movie, you want to take your time to get to that scene of everything, blowing up in the action movie. If that happened at the very beginning and that was the whole movie, you'd be pretty bored. So, a really busy, shreddy solo can be great as we can appreciate the guitar virtuoso. My favorite players are the players that maybe have that technical facility, but blend it with really playing melodies. So, that's kind of the way we're going to think about this. So if you're following along on the PDF, and I can put the PDF back in the chat bar for those who came a little bit later. If not, you don't really need to follow along. You can check it out later. And I believe Kurt will be able to email it or post it somewhere for you to see. But exercise 1, we're just going to be limiting the amount of notes that we have and focusing on the rhythm. So a key component to phrasing is rhythm, right? Because we can play, all the notes all day long, but if we really want people to grab on and use those spaces, we need to come up with more interesting rhythms. So the way that I like to practice these kind of things, and this is a general practice thing I do when I'm practicing a lot of different techniques, is limit what I have access to. So I'm forced to not have access to all the notes of the scale or all the notes on the fretboard. So one thing I might do, and we'll just stay with this A minor pentatonic scale. I got a little looper here. I got an A7, just a little 1-chord, little funky vamp. I might just play one note. I'm going to pick one note, and I'm going to try to play an interesting solo for everybody here with one note. So, all right, how am I going to play an interesting solo with one note? Well, obviously I can't just play really fast 16 notes or 30-second notes because you're going to get bored. So how can I keep you interested with just one note? Rhythm. So here we go. Here's my little vamp. So little motifs, like I took the same idea and repeated it. I did some little triplets, da 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 da. So, all right, let's add a second note. Let's add that C in the pentatonic scale, right? 8th fret, high E string. So all of a sudden, I have to come up with some interesting rhythms. Otherwise, it's not going to be interesting. So let's just add, the notes on the B string and the high E string in this minor pentatonic box. So talking about frets 5 and 8, right, on strings 1 and 2, the B string and the E string. So I had to make that interesting, and I had to come up with little ideas, right? So one thing I did something like da 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 do da 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 da. Like the first time I went up, the second time I did a similar idea but went down. So forcing yourself into a box, which we're always trying to break out of the box, but limiting the notes you have access to will force you to be able to use rhythm. So you could do this, by the way, with any 4 notes or any 2 strings. Like I just did, the E and the B string. You could do this in the same pentatonic box on the G string and the D string. So, that hopefully, is a little more interesting than just kind of running the notes up and down. And eventually you add in more notes and, okay, I'm gonna do this in the whole pentatonic box. Sometimes I like to limit myself down to only playing on the low strings, the low E string, the A string, and the D string. And maybe I have access to the entire fretboard or the entire neck or certain areas, but I'm only gonna stay on those strings, which is gonna force me. This is also a great exercise for breaking out of the pentatonic boxes. So in this case, I'm going to only stay on the low strings. So I have less notes, less strings. So all of a sudden, I'm going to have to come up with more interesting ideas. Now I want to go up to those high strings, but I have to stay on my low strings. Oops, I actually hit one note. Don't tell. So I don't have all my technical facility and fast chops that I've worked out, when I have access to all the strings when I'm on the low strings. So I have to come up with something more interesting. What about only playing above the 12th fret? A lot of us are a little less familiar, with playing up there. So you're going to have to really reach out and latch on to something that's more interesting. So when you don't have access to all the notes, you're going to find that you're more likely to play something a little bit different. And when I practice like this, I'm not necessarily going to go to my show or to my gig and say, all right, this is what I'm going to do tonight. I hope that people like it. This is what I do when I'm in my practice space as a way to really find new ideas and new ways of playing. And what I might do, when I'm thinking like this, is I might start a solo like that. And so then I can build to getting into more of my kind of stock, busier guitar phrases that we all know and love. But this is a way that I'm making rhythm actually happen, because there's nothing worse than just hearing a guitar solo that's just too many notes and doesn't go anywhere. It's not interesting, right? All right, cool. We'll keep moving on. So a lot of in terms of playing guitar players that really kind of can do a lot with not a lot of chops, or maybe know exactly the right time to use the chops. If we're thinking about, some of my favorite players that are great for studying phrasing, in the jazz world, like Grant Green, in the blues world, of course, we always talk about B.B. King and people like Albert Collins and, Robin Ford and Bonnie Raitt. I mean, so many to name, but players that can play just a few notes and really say something. So, okay, exercise number 2 in this is sing it. I put sing it. When we play, right, we slip into that guitaristic nature, but the thing about being a guitar player is that we can play and we can talk and we can chew gum, and it doesn't affect we're playing, right? I can talk right now and I can play all these notes. I can play all day. If you're a horn player, right? If you're a saxophone player or a trumpet player or a trombone player or a vocalist, you need to stop playing and take a breath because your instrument relies on air, on breathing. So that's, part of the deal. It's guitar players, bass players, keyboard players. We don't have to deal with that. So a lot of times we have the tendency to overplay because we don't actually have to, disengage from the instrument briefly to use our lungs. So horn players can get this kind of natural built-in phrasing that comes from the nature of the instrument. Whereas guitar players, we can just play notes as long as our fingers allow it. So one way to break out of this is to practice being vocal and actually singing and trying to match the melodies that you're singing with what you're playing on guitar. Now, one of my all-time favorite guitar players in the world is George Benson. If anybody's familiar with George Benson, you'll know he does this sort of scat singing thing where he, right? You don't have to be a great singer to do this. You don't have to be a singer at all to do this. And you don't have to, do a George Benson thing. The idea of this is twofold in terms of our overall goal of becoming better at phrasing. The first being that we want to tap into that deeper melodic voice that you're hearing in your head. When you hear those melodies that we talked about, when you're driving in your car and you're singing along to the radio and you think, boy, why can't I play these lines on guitar? That's what we're looking at, because you can already sing it, right? And if you can sing something, you can play it. It's just about finding the notes that match up to your voice. But also, we want to get those types of rests and spaces and pauses that come from having to take a breath into our playing. And the key here is to not sing what you're playing on guitar, but rather you want to play guitar with the lines that you're singing. So you want to play what you're singing because we're going into that deeper internal voice. And I've found that for me, when I sing and match it, I play completely different things than when I don't. And I really found myself starting to naturally just, I used to play a gig it was a Monday night gig. I had this gig for 8 years. It was a duo gig with an upright bass player. And if I had a weekend where I was playing a lot of guitar or practicing and whatever, I would come in and I'd play a lot. I'd play a lot of notes and whatever. But I would find out that if I had a weekend before that gig where like I went to the beach or I went out of town on a trip or I was hanging out with friends and I didn't touch the guitar all weekend, and then my first time playing the guitar was that Monday night, I maybe didn't have all the chops because I hadn't touched the guitar in a few days. And I found myself just naturally, singing along because I was internally forcing myself to come up with more interesting phrases and more interesting lines because I knew I couldn't play all the fast stuff. It probably wasn't going to work. I could probably try it and maybe, but I knew that because I hadn't touched the guitar in a few days, I maybe didn't warm up that day. So I find when I do that, I slip into something where I'm not really playing like licks from my favorite players. I'm not really playing because when I, give me a Strat, I'm playing Stevie Ray Vaughan licks and Eric Clapton licks all day long. But when I'm doing the singing thing, I'm just kind of playing blues. I'm playing blues licks and melodies that don't really, they may be stuff that I've heard somewhere that I'm it's coming out. But it's not like this is a lick I've learned because it's a lot more spontaneous than that. So try this, and I guarantee, I know some people don't like to sing or a little self-conscious. It's even less about matching the exact pitch if you're not a great singer. It doesn't have to match, your note. It could even just be the rhythm of what you're playing. And it's really this sort of internal thing relating the guitar to what you're thinking about. And how you're playing. And, even, I don't know if anybody has ever heard Keith Jarrett, the jazz piano player, but on all his recordings, you hear him, he's kind of grunting along as he plays. It's kind of a similar thing. Now, he's not, really on pitch on those kind of things, but that's the idea. So, I'll show you, and I'm going to just kind of sing some ideas. And I guarantee you that if I was just soloing, just soloing along, not thinking of singing, I would play something completely different. So, So, for me, like, that's something that if I wasn't singing, I probably wouldn't have played. If I wasn't singing, I'd probably go, playing more of that kind of stuff, which I might get to later in the solo. A lot of times what I find also, right, because all of us, there are very few of us, I would guess probably most of us, that don't have the facility as a singer that we do on the guitar, right? So when you're doing this, you're once again limiting yourself, because you're limiting yourself on the guitar to what you can do as a vocalist, as a singer. So you're bringing that level down a bit, which is bringing out these kind of melodies. And one thing I did there, right, it was just, something off the top of my head, but I did this little idea like that, where I played, that's a motif, right? It's an idea that I'm developing. So I slid into this E, talking 9th fret on the G string, then to the B string, 8 and 10, and then high E string 8. So those notes are E, G, A, C. And then the second time I played it, I went an octave lower. By the way, and I saw somebody commented about, singing, doing the harmonizing thing, like Jimi Hendrix did. I mentioned, well, yeah. So if you can harmonize, and sing a harmony over your guitar playing, that's, that's awesome too. But same kind of idea, when you're singing something, you can really kind of dig into that deeper thing. And so an idea like that. And then I think I did something after. I then took it to a different place. I started the same way. And then all of a sudden, I have an idea that the audience, that the listener can latch on to. And giving the audience, giving the listener something to latch on to is very important, because really, like when we solo and when we're soloing over tune, and it doesn't matter if it's a 1-chord vamp like this, or if it's a blues, or if it's a jazz standard, like All the Things You Are, really a great way to think about improvising and soloing on guitar is all you're doing when you're playing a solo is you are composing a new melody over the chord changes to that particular song. You're a composer and you're coming up with a new melody for that song. It just so happens that you're doing it on the spot, which is a bit of a challenge, right? You're doing it on the spot. You're improvising a melody, but that's what you're doing. So if you think about all the songs that have great melodies, Beatles songs, Stevie Wonder songs, right? The idea of a good melody, the contour of a melody, when it goes up, when it goes down, when an idea is repeated, it's what makes a good, memorable melody. And you want the same kind of thing to happen in your guitar solo. So how many of you, and it doesn't matter, what style, could sing one of your favorite guitar solos? Doesn't matter, what it is, but we've all had that where we know a guitar solo so well that you can sing the whole thing. Whether it's like something like Hotel California or something, right? Right, we all know that solo and could probably sing along with it, maybe even a little easier than we could play it. As I said, Jim Hall's Song Without a Song. Yeah, Jim Hall is another example of a great, jazz guitar player who just the idea of the phrasing, playing right notes in the right places at the right time. And in the case of jazz guitar, outlining the changes, outlining what the chord changes are, that can be really, really crucial and really important for making the song interesting. So cool. All right. So that brings me to the third idea, which is motivic development. And the idea of a motif in music is just a simple little musical idea that we can repeat and develop. Take a little something like a little spark and develop it throughout the solo. And so, like I said earlier, a good speaker, a good orator will say something, leave a pause for the audience to reflect, and then continue. And that's like in musical practice, leaving a space for the band to respond or for somebody to respond. And a great example of this, in terms of audience interplay, and this is a huge tradition in the blues, call and response, is if you listen to a live B.B. King record from the 60s, something like Live at the Regal or Blues is King, the audience is mic'd up really well on those records. And you'll hear BB play a little lick, and you'll hear the audience, yeah, woo, make these expressions of digging what he's playing, right? He's leaving space for that kind of response. Oh yeah, Live at Cook County Jail, another great one. Yeah, any of those BB King live records where they really, have the audience high up in the mix. The same kind of thing goes when you listen to, say, to BB King. There's that call and response going when he sings a line and then plays a little phrase that's a call and response after. So that's the kind of idea that we're thinking about. This sort of call and response. When when BB King says, "Bend down harder, baby," and then he'll play a little guitar line. So the idea of call and response and taking an idea, right? And I'm going to come up with a little idea, and then I'm going to maybe play it again, but maybe play it a little bit differently. But also the idea of repetition can be very important too, playing the same kind of thing over again. And it may seem like the thing about repetition is like, well, doesn't this kind of go against everything I'm saying? But going back to the thinking about language, right, and speaking, the idea that when we really want to emphasize something when we speak, we repeat the same thing over again. If for example, I have a 3-year-old who's, knocks over everything in the house. And when he's going to grab something, a vase or something, I go, no, 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 right? I'm not just going to say no once. I really want to emphasize this point, like stay away from that. It's going to break. Don't touch it. So I'll say no multiple times. Or, anytime we really want to emphasize something, we'll say it over and over again. So same kind of thing, right? When you're playing an idea, you can take the same idea and play it over and over again the same way, or you can do a little bit of a variation. Maybe change 1 or 2 notes, and I'll show you what I'm talking about there. So I'm actually going to just plug a blues into my looper. I did write out this in both standard notation and tab, and I gave a little analysis of what's going on. So if you do want to follow along, this is on page 4 or example 3 in the packet. And just give me a second. I'm going to plug in a blues in A into my looper. We'll do a little shuffle here. So let me start that over. So, okay. So I have my main idea, right? This is kind of like the master idea that everything will be based off of. So I'm going to start my solo. And this is something, by the way, you can all practice, whether you're playing with a backing track or playing with a looper. I recommend a looper. Backing track is great too. Both are great. A backing track will give you the simulation of playing with a band and hearing the drums and the keyboards and the bass and hearing how the guitar fits in with everything. The thing I like about practicing with a looper is you can make the tempo and the chord changes exactly what you want. You don't have to go searching for the backing track of what you're looking for. It's a great way to practice your time and your time feel, because you have to have, if you're playing for 12 bars, you have to have, pretty consistent time when you hit that looper and it comes back around. We'll see if I did. And also the thing about the looper is that because it just keeps going over and over and over and over and over again until I stop it, I tend to practice longer when I have the looper going, and I'm kind of like searching for ideas. When the backing track is over, I might say, okay, time for something new. But I've been practicing. I started practicing with a looper pretty early on. My first guitar teacher had this old Gibson Echoplex digital unit, but not like the tape Echoplex, but it had the Echoplex name, and it was like a rack unit that had basically like red digital numbers, like an alarm clock, and it had a foot pedal, and the thing was huge. It was like a big rack piece. And, he told me, I was 12 at the time. He said, you got to get one of these. It's going to be great for playing. You can practice playing along. And I think these units were like $1,500. And my parents were like, no way, we're not going to get you a $1,500 thing that goes along with your $100 Squire, guitar. That doesn't make much sense. But shortly thereafter, I think the first Boss RC20 came out. This is like 2000. And then I used that as a practice tool ever since. And I retired it for a TC Electronic Ditto looper a few years ago. But so anyway, I recommend a looper. Little side note there. So my first idea here in terms of developing a motif or developing an idea. So that's my little idea. So kind of thinking a little bluesy idea. A little bit out of the pentatonic because I have this F sharp. So it's kind of a Mixolydian idea for those of you who are familiar with the modes, but even if you're not, that's my little idea. So let me just play this, and then I'll kind of talk about it and break it down. Let me just make sure I remember this. Cool. Yeah. So, all right. So what I'm going to do, let me start the loop, and I'll play my little idea. Maybe I'll put a little overdrive on it just to make it pop out. Let's see. Here we go. I'll just start the loop. I can't count into it. Yeah, and I might have gotten a little off track on the last few bars, but that was not the main kind of part. So thinking about a blues, right? What I'm going to do is I introduce my idea at the beginning, which is... And then my first variation number 1, it's going to be the same idea, but instead of going to this higher C that's at the 8th fret of the high E string, I'm going to just take that last note an octave lower. So it's the same rhythm, and it's actually the same notes. We're just turning the last note an octave lower. So then variation number 2 comes along, just in time to hit the 4 chord in bar 5 of the blues. And for that, I'm going to start it the exact same way and play the exact same rhythm. But instead of doing what I already did, I'm going to go even higher this time and go up to the 10th fret and 8th fret of the high E string, E and D. So far we got my main idea. Now I'm going to take it lower. Now I'm going to go high. And then for the fourth sort of phrase, the fourth iteration of it, I'm going to go back to the first variation, which takes me back down lower. So this entire time, I've had this same little rhythmic idea, and I've just done a little bit of tweaking to change it, whether I'm going high, whether I'm transposing one of the notes down an octave, whether I'm returning to an idea that I've already started. And then when I get to the 5 chord, I'm done with that idea now. I'm going somewhere else, new idea. So I did, boom, 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 boom. And then, just kind of a stock turnaround. Then I kind of rely on my stock guitar, little phrase there. So, yeah. So let me go ahead and just play that same thing again. And now, think about it from that perspective as well. Sorry, let me get the looper. Okay. This is a new idea. that same idea again. Now I'm going higher. Repeating to build. So in that building, then I was able to get to that point where I'm playing a lot higher because I sort of drew everybody in. I built you into it, built up to that idea. And now all of a sudden I have a lot more license to play all the faster, busier stuff because I spent some time starting to tell the story, bring everybody in. So, that's kind of an idea. And the best way, that you can do this is to just come up with a little idea, a little short phrase, a few notes, and then think, how can I make that? And if you want to do the limiting practice thing, come up with a little lick and say, okay, I'm going to play over this blues progression, but I can only use this rhythm. You can change the notes, but you could come up with some kind of rhythm. Da 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 da. Let's say that's our rhythm. Da 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 da. So I'm going to play over a whole course of blues, and I'm only going to use that rhythm. Let's see. Let me start again. Maybe I'll play the same thing over a D7. So I built that little idea just based on one rhythm. You can also take a similar idea and instead of starting it on the same beat every time, let's see, na, 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 na. I'll just go down the scale for this to keep it easy. So you might start on beat 1. Da, 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 da. Now beat 2. 1. Da, 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 da. Beat 3. 1, 2, 3. Da, 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 da. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you could also think about taking those ideas and just starting on different places. You don't have to necessarily start, right at the top of the tune or right on beat 1 of your solo. Give a chance to breathe. Give it a second. Little notier here. Exploring the full range of the instrument. So coming up with a little motif, is a great way to do that. So on the last page, talk about a few more little ideas, things that you can think about in terms of building your solo, making your solo more interesting. And by the way, just actually a quick side note, a lot of these ideas and the way I first started thinking about this, there's a great instructional video. It's kind of the only one that I can think of on this topic, purely talking about phrasing, not making it a component of something else, that got me thinking about it. There's a Scott Henderson thing from the early 90s. I had it on VHS. I'm sure you can download it now. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it. I think it's just called Rhythmic Phrasing. And, if you watch it now, it's very much a product of its era. He's sitting in front of like a little old Mac computer with the screensaver going, and playing against these very, very of the period fusion kind of songs. And a lot of the improvisational things that he talks about later on get pretty advanced. But at the very beginning, he's talking about the same kind of thing. But one of the things he says in that, and if anybody's familiar with Scott Henderson, that this is a guy with insane, crazy chops and can play all kinds of stuff. But he says in that video, he said, "I'd rather listen to Albert King drop his guitar. I'd rather hear the sound of Albert King dropping his guitar on the floor than some, jazz guitar player or shredder just playing streams of eighth notes and 16th notes with no rests and no spaces and no phrasing." So something to think about. So a few more ideas, for building a solo. Low and slow. That's, a great way for both barbecue, when he's doing some 4th of July barbecuing tomorrow, and for your solos. if you start your solos on the lower strings, which this is all depending on, the musical context. Some guitar solos, right? If you're playing a short 8-bar guitar solo on some rock tune, you might want to come just out of the gate, just, shredding, just blaring, playing in the higher register, because that's what the song calls for. A lot of what I'm talking about here, we ultimately want to serve the song, whatever song we're soloing over or improvising over, we want to serve the song. So most of these things will particularly come in handy when you're playing over an open solo, an open form, right? Where it's basically up to you when it starts and ends. Whether it's a 1-chord vamp, you're just, hey, let's jam over A minor to D7, or just jam over A minor, or you're playing over a blues, or you have an extended solo. Now, if you're playing, if you're playing the solo, into like some song where there's just a real short period where there's a solo, and the emotion, the feeling of that solo, the emotion, the thing that needs to be conveyed is just a really fast, loud, high up, notey solo. That's great, because in a shorter period of time, you need to tell a shorter story. So you got to get through all those kind of things. But if you have a longer period of time, that little 8-bar shreddy playing up fast, that's not going to work. You got to build into that. So a lot of times when I'm playing a solo where the band comes down for me to start and I get the opportunity to sort of build all the way up, I like to start on the low register and really build. If anybody's a fan of, Derek Trucks, I'm not going to play slide, but we'll do, we'll start on the low strings. So when I start, now I'll go a little higher. So when I start on the low strings, I automatically give myself a place to go, because, it can only go up from there. And what I found also, if you want to bring the band down, you play some low stuff, they're going to be forced to come down, to kind of be able to hear that in the mix. So that's a great way to practice starting your solos and forcing you to build. Same thing with dynamics, right? If we're thinking about building a solo and it's going to be a longer extended solo, if you start down low and start quietly and leave that kind of space, but also volume level, then you're going to give yourself more headroom in order to, crank the solo and build a solo. So, if you think about, once again, Derek Trucks is great. If you ever see videos of him playing with his band, Tedeschi Trucks Band or the Allman Brothers, he'll come on super late. He'll let the solo start and he'll play one note, even if it's in the higher register. And it's almost, in sometimes the same thing with, John Mayer, a lot of people that do this, that leave almost an uncomfortable amount of pause. And if you listen to a live record, what's going on in that pause? The audience is going, woo, they want to hear more, right? You're giving people just a taste. Therefore, people, they want to hear what's going to come next. It's like a to be continued. You're leaving people with something to be desired. And when you start, it gives you a place to go, right? Because you want that headroom in order to be able to build your solo somewhere. And also that's going to force the band, because if you're playing with the band, if anybody plays, just jams to the band or plays gigs with the band, a lot of times if the band is just cooking and it's kind of hard to build your solo if the band isn't right there with you, because they're supporting you and they're supposed to be listening to you. But sometimes we get in the situation where we're playing with a band that's not listening and not supporting us. And so if you want to force that, you need to get the band to come down to give you that space, leave some space and just play. Even, you can, I sometimes might tell my band, if they're playing an arm to come down, I'll stop and I'll just go, bring it down. Give me some space here. So that's another great technique. Once again, repeating phrases as a way of building. We talked about that. And just taking some idea, some lick that you like, but change one note each time you play it, which is another kind of thing we did. You find a little lick you like, something like that, let's just say. Another little A minor pentatonic lick. Maybe that time, instead of a C to a D, I'm going to play the ninth instead. That's going to change it. Maybe I'll change the entire, phrase. Just keep that same rhythm. But another thing you can do is take a melody that you like and make a solo based off of a melody of a song. So I put here, learn to play vocal melodies on guitar. I'll get to that in a second. But let's just say Come Together, right? That's just literally just popped into my head randomly. We think about that opening riff, right? Right, let's just take that first. That's a cool little rhythm. I'll play over this blues. And I'm going to play just using that rhythm from a song because I know, hey, that everybody knows that rhythm. That must be a good little rhythm that has some good space. So that's another idea. And another way to really be melodic on the guitar is to actually learn to play vocal melodies. Learn to play melodies of songs that you would normally just play the guitar part. But if you can learn to play, the part that Stevie Wonder sings or the part that Paul McCartney sings on the guitar, it doesn't have to be a guitar lick. A melody is a melody, whether it's played on the guitar or on the saxophone or whether it's sung, by a vocalist. So find a song that you like where there's ordinarily a singer and learn to play the melody. If I'm thinking about something like Isn't She Lovely? Something like that. And I'm thinking about that melody as a motif, right? We get this first little statement. That's our first statement. Then Stevie sings a line that's a variation of that. Na, 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 right? It just goes a little lower and adds a few extra notes. Repeats it again. Throw the chords in there. So that kind of idea, if you learn to play a melody of a song, these sorts of rhythms, different ideas, different things that aren't part of, just these stock guitar licks will start to work their way into your playing and make you more of an improviser or a soloist that breaks out of just playing guitar stuff and sort of transcends the instrument and plays melodies. And so, I named a bunch of players at the beginning, but I'm thinking, Larry Carlton, Robin Ford, Derek Trucks, all these kind of players that sort of transcend the instrument in terms of really playing great melodies and great ideas. So those are all kind of things that will help you internalize good phrasing, good development.